When I pulled into the gravel driveway that morning, the mist from the mountain air clung to my windshield like a soft curtain. The cabin stood just as I remembered it. Cedar wood faded a little more than before, pine needles scattered across the porch, and the same old rocking chair my dad had built creaking in the wind. 3 years. That's how long it had been since I last stood here. I killed the engine and stepped out, letting the silence soak in. The forest smelled like rain and pine sap. For a moment, it felt like coming home, until I saw the signs. Bright red letters glared from every corner of my property. No trespassing. Private HOA land. Asterisk, asterisk, my heart dropped. At first, I thought I had the wrong cabin. But no, that was my old rain barrel, my shed with the dented door, the wind chime made from fishing lures that my mother had hung years ago. This was my land, and yet the sign screamed otherwise. I took a step closer, brushing the dew off one of them. The logo at the bottom read, Pine Ridge Homeowners Association. That couldn't be right. When I bought this place, the nearest HOA was 10 miles down the road, near the new developments. This cabin was on independent land, part of the original forest plots. Something had changed while I was gone. I heard the sound of tires on gravel and turned to see a silver SUV creeping down the road. It rolled to a stop right in front of my driveway, and out stepped a woman in her late 50s, wearing a bright pink jogging outfit, oversized sunglasses, and a permanent frown. She didn't introduce herself. She just stood there, clutching a clipboard like a weapon. "Excuse me," she said sharply. "Can I help you?" I blinked. "Help me? I own this cabin." Her lips twitched. "That's impossible. This property has been under Pine Ridge HOA jurisdiction for 2 years now. If you're not a registered resident, you can't be here." I laughed nervously. "I think there's been a mistake. My name's Alex Reed. I bought this place in 2015. I still pay the property taxes myself. I haven't sold it." "Well, Mr. Reed, according to our records, this land was annexed into the HOA district during a community expansion. All property owners were notified." "Notified?" I repeated. "I was overseas for work. I never got any notice." Her tone hardened. "That's not our fault. You should have kept your contact information updated. Now, if you don't leave immediately, I'll have to call security." Security? For my own property? I clenched my jaw. "You do that," I said, trying to stay calm. "And while you're at it, maybe you can explain why there are illegal signs posted on my land." The woman smirked, clearly not used to being challenged. "You can take it up with the HOA board, Mr. Reed." "My name is Marlene Carter, president of the Pine Ridge Homeowners Association. I suggest you come to our meeting tomorrow evening. But until then, this property is off limits." And just like that, she turned and walked back to her SUV. I stood there in disbelief as her tires kicked up gravel and disappeared around the bend. That night, I couldn't sleep. I set up a cot inside the cabin, listening to the wind creak through the trees. My phone had no signal out here, so I couldn't even look up what had happened while I was gone. How could my land just become part of an HOA? Without my consent? I poured myself a cup of instant coffee and sat by the old wood stove, watching the embers fade. My parents had built this cabin from scratch back in the late 80s. It wasn't fancy, but it was home. Losing it to some neighborhood bureaucracy wasn't an option. When the sun rose, I walked down to the nearest house, a new build that hadn't been there 3 years ago. The paint still looked fresh, and the lawn was so manicured it could have been a golf course. A man in his 40s was washing his truck in the driveway. He wore a Pine Ridge HOA hat. I raised a hand. "Hey there, I'm Alex. I own the cabin up the road. Do you know what's going on with this HOA thing?" He hesitated, glancing toward a camera mounted under his porch light. "You mean the annexation?" "Yeah, that was Marlene's idea. Said the whole area needed to be brought up to community standards." "Community standards?" I asked. This isn't a subdivision. These are individual plots. He shrugged. Tell that to her. She got some lawyer involved, pushed through a vote with the newer residents, claimed it would raise property values. Next thing we knew, everyone around here was paying dues. And people went along with it? Some did. Others didn't have the energy to fight. But you're the only one who's been gone for years, so your property's kind of been a topic. A topic? He nodded awkwardly. Marlene called it an eyesore, said it was abandoned. She even held a meeting about it. A couple of folks suggested tearing it down. My stomach turned. Tearing it down? He wiped his hands on a towel. Yeah, I don't agree with her methods, man, but she's persuasive. You might want to talk to a lawyer before you go to that meeting. I thanked him and walked back toward my cabin, the weight of it all sinking in. It wasn't just about signs anymore. They wanted control. The next evening, I showed up at the Pine Ridge Community Center, a modern building that looked completely out of place against the forest backdrop. SUVs lined the parking lot, all spotless and expensive. Inside, the meeting room buzzed with low chatter. Neighbors I didn't recognize filled the chairs, sipping coffee from branded mugs. At the front sat Marlene and a few other board members, each with neatly printed nameplates. When she saw me, her expression froze. "Mr. Reed," she said into the microphone, "please take a seat. We'll address your issue during the public comment portion." I sat in the back, feeling every eye on me. They spent the first 20 minutes discussing lawn maintenance rules, paint color approvals, and noise complaints. I wanted to laugh. We were surrounded by wilderness, and these people were talking about fence heights. Finally, Marlene cleared her throat. Next item. The matter of Lot 47, the Reed property. My heart thumped. She continued, "As many of you know, this lot has been unoccupied for over 3 years. It has not met HOA maintenance standards, and due to recent trespassing incidents, we've designated it as restricted access until ownership can be verified." I stood up. "Ownership can be verified right here. I'm Alex Reed, the legal owner." A murmur rippled through the room. Marlene raised an eyebrow. "Mr. Reed, do you have proof of ownership with you?" I pulled the deed from my folder and handed it to her. She glanced at it briefly before setting it aside. "We'll need to verify this with the county," she said coolly. "Until then, the restriction stands." "You can't just ban me from my own land," I snapped. She smiled tightly. "Actually, under HOA Article 12, Section 4, we have authority to restrict access for properties deemed unsafe or in violation of community standards. Until your ownership status is cleared, it falls under that clause." I looked around the room, expecting someone to speak up, but they all stared down at their papers. One man, sitting near the front, raised his hand. "Isn't this overreach? The man owns the land." Marlene's eyes flicked toward him. "Thank you, Mr. Alvarez. The board will handle it." He lowered his hand quickly. I exhaled sharply. "You know what? Go ahead and verify it. But when you find out you're wrong, I expect those signs gone, and I'll be expecting an apology." Marlene smiled again, that practiced, infuriating smile of someone who thought they were untouchable. "We'll be in touch," she said. Over the next few days, things escalated. I started noticing unfamiliar vehicles slowing down near my driveway, taking photos. Someone left a notice taped to my door, a fine for unauthorized occupancy. Another day, I found a bright orange tag nailed to a tree, labeling it for removal due to fire hazard noncompliance. I caught one of Marlene's board members snapping pictures of my cabin one afternoon. When I confronted him, he muttered something about HOA documentation and drove off. It felt like harassment. The neighbors kept their distance. Some waved politely, others avoided eye contact altogether. Only Mr. Alvarez, the man from the meeting, stopped by one evening. He brought over a thermos of coffee and sat with me on the porch. "You know," he said quietly, "Marlene's been running this place like her personal kingdom. People don't stand up to her because they're afraid of fines or getting their property reviewed. But what she's doing to you, that's beyond the line. I'm starting to see that, I said. I talked to the county assessor's office today. They said the HOA's annexation might not even be legal. Something about missing signatures. He smiled faintly. Sounds like you might have a case. I nodded. I'm not leaving until this is settled. As the sun dipped below the tree line, I noticed headlights approaching from the road. Marlene's SUV. She pulled up to the end of my driveway again, rolled down her window, and called out, "Mr. Reed, you are in violation of multiple HOA codes. I strongly suggest you vacate before we escalate this further." I stood my ground. "You have no authority here, Marlene. This is my land." She leaned out the window, her tone sharp as a blade. "We'll see about that." Then she drove off, taillights vanishing into the fog. That night, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was far from over. The signs, the threats, the silence from the county, it all felt like a setup. Somewhere deep down, I knew Marlene wasn't just fighting for hoe control. She wanted something else. And I was about to find out what it was. The next morning, I woke to the sound of hammering. It took me a moment to realize it wasn't inside my dream. Someone was outside. I pulled on a jacket and stepped onto the porch. Two men in reflective vests were pounding a fresh sign into the ground at the end of my driveway. The letters were bigger this time. Property under HOA review, access restricted. One of them looked up, startled to see me. "Hey," I called out. "What do you think you're doing?" The younger one hesitated, but the older man just shrugged. "Orders from the Pine Ridge Board, sir. We were told to mark all pending review properties." "This property isn't pending anything," I snapped. "It's mine. You're trespassing." He shifted uncomfortably. "Take it up with the board, okay? We're just doing our jobs." "Your job doesn't include breaking the law," I said. "Remove that sign and get off my land." The younger one looked nervous, glancing at the older man. "Maybe we should," but before he could finish, a familiar voice cut through the air. "Gentlemen, continue what you're doing." Marlene stood at the end of the road, arms crossed, sunglasses gleaming even though the sky was cloudy. She had her phone in hand, already recording. "Mr. Reed," she said, her voice laced with smugness, "interfering with HOA business is a violation of Community Code 5.2. I suggest you step back." I walked toward her, forcing myself to stay calm. "You're trespassing. Again. I told you yesterday that this is private property." She tilted her head. "Private property within a managed community. You're out of compliance with maintenance and safety standards. These signs are standard procedure." "Procedure?" I scoffed. "You made up these rules just to get me out." Marlene didn't even flinch. "You're welcome to challenge it at the next board hearing. But until then, you're in violation." She motioned for the workers to continue and turned to leave. The audacity made my blood boil. I grabbed my phone and started filming her. "Good idea," I said. "Now it's my turn to record. Smile for the camera, Marlene. I'll make sure everyone sees this." Her face stiffened. "You're making a mistake, Mr. Reed." "No," I said evenly. "You are." She walked away briskly, barking at the workers to hurry. I filmed every second until they left, leaving behind their unwanted sign like a scar on the property line. That evening, I drove into town to meet a lawyer recommended by the county clerk's office. His name was Nathan Cole, a local who specialized in property disputes. He listened quietly as I explained everything: the annexation, the signs, the harassment. When I finished, he sat back in his chair and sighed. "You're not the first to have trouble with Pine Ridge HOA. They've been expanding aggressively. But what you're describing sounds personal." "It feels that way," I said. "Can they really do this?" He rubbed his chin. "Not legally. If your deed predates the HOA's incorporation, they can't enforce their bylaws on you without your written consent. Annexation requires voluntary inclusion. If they didn't have your signature, it's invalid. So they're bluffing. He nodded slowly. Bluffing, or worse, counting on you not to fight back. I plan to fight, I said. He smiled faintly. Good. I'll pull the records from the county tomorrow. In the meantime, document everything. Photos, recordings, notes, every interaction. When I left his office, the air felt lighter for the first time in days, but that relief didn't last. When I returned to the cabin, I noticed something different. The path leading to the back of the property had been disturbed, fresh tire tracks in the mud. I followed them quietly, heart pounding. They led to my shed. The padlock was broken, hanging by a twisted latch. Inside, boxes were overturned, tools scattered. My father's old generator was gone. Someone had been here. I stood there, gripping the broken lock, anger buzzing under my skin. I knew exactly who would claim responsibility. By the time I called the sheriff's department, the sky was already dimming. 2 deputies arrived just before dark. One of them, a young woman with a calm voice, took my statement. When I mentioned Marlene's name, they exchanged a look. She's a frequent caller, the deputy said carefully. Usually about noise complaints or property violations, but we'll file a report and keep an eye on the area. Do you think she's behind this? I asked. We can't speculate, she said. But you should install cameras. People tend to behave differently when they know they're being watched. I nodded, though I already knew cameras wouldn't stop Marlene. She wasn't just enforcing rules, she was trying to break me. The next morning, I started putting up my own signs. Private property. Owner occupied. Trespassers will be prosecuted. I nailed one right next to her HOA notice. 2 could play that game. As I hammered the last nail, a familiar voice came from the road. Trying to be funny, Mr. Reed? I turned. Marlene was back, this time with a man I hadn't seen before, a tall guy in a navy blazer, holding a clipboard and wearing an expression of pure authority. This is Mr. Trent Walker, Marlene said, our HOA legal consultant. Walker stepped forward. Mr. Reed, I'm here to inform you that the HOA has voted to impose fines for noncompliance. You currently owe $2,400 for unauthorized alterations and property neglect. I laughed. You've got to be kidding. Marlene crossed her arms. Failure to pay will result in a lien against your property. That's illegal, I said. You can't lien a property that doesn't fall under your jurisdiction. Walker smiled thinly. That's a matter of interpretation. The board has the right to enforce community covenants. You can dispute it in writing. I stepped closer, and I will. With my lawyer. Marlene's eyes flickered. Oh, a lawyer. How charming. Just know, Mr. Reed, we've dealt with your type before. My type? She smirked. Nonconformists. People who think the rules don't apply to them. The rules don't apply when they're illegal, I said. Her expression hardened. You'll regret that attitude? I took out my phone and snapped a photo of both of them. Say cheese. Walker stepped back, clearly uncomfortable. Marlene turned away, muttering something under her breath before storming back to her car. The sound of her engine fading down the road was the sweetest thing I'd heard all day. Over the next week, I noticed small changes. Someone had dumped gravel at the edge of my driveway, blocking half the entrance. My mail started arriving late, or not at all. Even the trash pickup skipped my property. When I confronted the garbage driver, he shrugged. OA said your account was suspended. Of course they did. I recorded everything. Every incident, every missing delivery, every vehicle that lingered too long near my cabin. Nathan called me 2 days later. I've got something, he said. You were right. The annexation vote didn't include your signature. In fact, it doesn't even show your property number on the original map. They added it later, by hand. Can we use that? I asked. Absolutely. That's document fraud. We'll file a cease and desist letter and request a full retraction from the HOA. For the first time, I smiled. Maybe this nightmare was finally turning in my favor. 2 nights later, around midnight, I woke to the sound of my motion alarm. The cameras I'd installed were connected to my laptop, and the screen lit up with grainy night footage. A car was parked near the end of the driveway. Someone got out. Even in the low light, I recognized the shape of the jacket, the bob of the haircut. Marlene. She walked up to my property line, flashlight in hand, taking photos of the signs I'd posted. Then she did something that made my blood run cold. She reached into her pocket, pulled out a small can, and sprayed something across one of my signs. When she turned toward the camera, I saw it clearly. Condemned. She'd painted the word across my property marker. That was it. The next morning, I drove straight to Nathan's office and showed him the footage. He watched it twice, eyebrows raised. "She's digging her own grave," he said. "This is textbook harassment. We'll add it to the case file. I'll have the sheriff's office issue a formal warning." "Good," I said, "because I'm done playing nice." When I returned home, I wasn't alone. 2 sheriff's deputies were parked at the cabin. One of them, the same woman from before, met me halfway up the path. "Mr. Reed, we got a call from Miss Carter. She claims you're threatening HOA members." I stared at her. "She's lying." "I figured," the deputy said. "But we still have to check in. Everything okay here?" "Depends on your definition of okay." She smiled faintly. "Just hang tight. We'll talk to her." After they left, I sat on the porch steps, staring out at the trees. The peace that once defined this place felt poisoned. Every shadow looked like a camera. Every noise, a setup. Then, just as the sun dipped behind the ridge, my phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. "You shouldn't have come back." I froze. The number wasn't listed. No name. Just those words. I showed it to Nathan the next morning, and he frowned. "This is escalating faster than I thought. I'll push the county to expedite the review. In the meantime, maybe stay somewhere else for a few days." "No," I said. "If I leave, they'll take advantage. I'm not giving them that satisfaction." He studied me for a moment. "Then at least be ready. People like Marlene don't back down when they think they're losing control." 2 nights later, I found out exactly what he meant. I was sitting by the stove, reading through old property papers, when a sharp crack split the night. It wasn't thunder. I stepped outside and saw smoke rising from the edge of the woods. I ran toward it, heart pounding, flashlight bouncing against the dark. When I reached the clearing, I saw flames licking up one of my old wood piles. Someone had poured gasoline. I grabbed a shovel, beating at the fire until it died down. The smell of burnt pine filled the air. Near the pile, half buried in the dirt, was a metal can. A can of paint thinner. I took a photo, hands shaking. This wasn't just harassment anymore. This was a threat. As I stared at the smoldering ashes, headlights appeared at the road again. For a split second, I thought it was the sheriff. But the SUV that crept into view was familiar. Marlene's. She stopped at the driveway, rolled down her window, and smiled. "Careful, Mr. Reed," she called out sweetly. "You wouldn't want the forest catching fire. The HOA might have to declare your cabin unsafe." Then she drove off into the darkness. I stood there, smoke curling into the night sky, heart pounding in my chest. Something had shifted. This wasn't just about property anymore. It was war. By the next morning, I could still smell the smoke in the air. It clung to my jacket, to the trees, to the memory of what had happened. I barely slept, half expecting more headlights to appear, another spark to light up the woods. But when the sun came up, the quiet felt heavier than before. Too still. Too careful. I walked around the property, documenting everything. The burn marks, the tracks, the can of paint thinner now sealed in a plastic evidence bag the deputy had left behind. They promised an investigation, but I knew how these things went. Unless someone confessed, it would get buried in paperwork. Marlene knew that too.